Thank you very much for tuning in. And today I would like to talk about pattern and art and archetypes. I'm Ann Marshall, and I'm fascinated by this subject. I believe that awareness is one of the most important skills necessary for the 21st century. And in fact, that thought comes from a person by the name Yuval Harari, and he was a two-time winner of the Polanski Prize for Creativity and Originality. So that really is our focus. I'm looking at becoming really aware of patterns in nature and art and around us throughout the world, as well as especially with behavior and looking at them in terms of archetype. So what I'd like to do is to share the screen and pull up a PowerPoint that I have. And this is always a little bit of an awkward moment for me, but we'll see what I can do here. And there we have our first slide, and that's the subject that we're talking about. So first, what is a pattern? And a pattern is something that organizes. It's a structure that creates sameness and expectability out of a number of variables. The early Greek philosophers studied pattern as a way to actually understand nature. And there's a Harvard biologist, Peter Stevens, who referred to the connections which can be seen in any situation, in nature and in man-made images as well, and from the microscopic, from the very small to the very large and cosmic. So patterns will have familiarity, they have sequence, there's groupings, there's regularity, and they repeat in a predictable manner. And why we like them so much is because we can count on them. We know where things are going. So in nature, these patterns are pervasive and they're permanent and they're everywhere you look. And again, both in nature as well as in the man-made and urban settings. The world around us is filled with patterns. So we think of the seasons that as the earth begins to come to life with new growth in the springtime. And then there is the pattern of the full growth during summer and the harvest during fall and the preparing for the next spring during the winter time, or the sun setting at the end of the day and coming up in the beginning of the day. So cycles being repeated, the waves coming in, the waves going out. We can see them in flowers and rocks and in plants, even on spots on a leopard, footprints on the sand, the tessellations of the way the leaves blow in the trees and the rings on a tree is just a beautiful pattern. They come in symmetries, spirals, meanders, stripes. There's a number of different ways we can look at the patterns. And patterns have also been fully explored in the sciences of mathematics, physics, chemistry, music, biology, and on and on. So here's a picture of the golden ratio, and Leonardo Fibonacci in the year 1202 introduced us to this Fibonacci sequence, and it is known as the golden ratio, and it is actually the same pattern that we see in the Nautilus shell. So patterns in art, if you can really start to expand your mind, we've looked at kind of patterns in nature and patterns in the man-made world. Look out farther into art and see how you can spot these predictable sequencings and groupings. So they're visual and repeated. They have corresponding parts. They can be called a motif. Patterns is actually a compositional element where it grabs attention, whether that attention is either subtle or apparent. And a quote by Alfred Whitehead, who is a British philosopher and mathematician, in the mid to late 1800s said art is the imposing of a pattern on experience, and our aesthetic enjoyment is recognition of that pattern. And that's what the key word, recognizing and registering that pattern. Again, they're comfortable, they're familiar, we know where we're going, we know where we've been. And really importantly, looking at patterns and behavior, then we're looking at Plato, and he was one of the first to actually refer to what he called as universals. And these are connections that humans make to create understanding and commonalities. Carl Jung, this is a picture of Carl Jung, who almost 100 years ago defined and described these patterns and called them archetypes. So an archetype is described as an original pattern from which all things of the same thing are copied. And symbolic patterns traverse all time, all cultures, all boundaries, and they've been around forever. Marion Woodman said an archetype is an inborn pattern of images, ideas, and instinctual impulses that function much like a hidden magnet. We cannot actually see such underlying patterns, but we are propelled by their energy. So I like to think that, there's a human being, underneath is the archetype, and that as we sprinkle behavior on top, the behavior will take the form and the shape of the archetype underneath. So what we see, what's manifested, is the behavior of the archetype. And archetypes now are, think of every favorite book that you've read, every hot box movie that you've seen, maybe even loved songs, they all have an archetype behind them. And so look to see what that pattern is of those main characters. We can think of them familiarly as like hero. And if we look at the patterns of behavior that are associated with hero, one of them is a hero goes on a journey. Another archetype that's very familiar is mother, and mother has a pattern of nurturing. So when we say the word mother, an image comes up. Or angel is that divine messenger. So we look for those qualities that are both expressed. And so it's important to understand that it's the awareness of the pattern that is what really makes the difference. And there's also a light and a shadow. So we don't see the shadow because the shadow is behind us. And it's not that a shadow is bad and the light is good. We hold them equally, that you can't have light without shadow. But the important thing is that many of us are operating from a shadow aspect. We can call that our operating system, and we don't know that we're activating a pattern. So that's kind of like looking at what the archetype is, and we also understand that it's really important to distinguish those patterns or that operating system, and it's easier to see them usually in other people than it is in ourselves. And I love the quote that the unexamined life is not worth living. That comes from Socrates, who was an early Greek philosopher. And Beth Martins, who talks about archetypes, says that they are the superpowers that help us complete our missions on Earth. So really just a big subject to take a look at, a big pattern. And there are many, 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 many of these patterns. So claiming them and understanding them is what's important, and starting to know or understand that maybe we can reboot our innate operating system by becoming aware of the pattern and operating from a different side of the shadow to light spectrum. That makes any sense. So I want to talk a little bit about my journey, because And I think it might kind of shed a little bit of light here. So I started for a 30-day challenge from a system of insight hunting called Private Work. And you can find privatework.com as the slide indicates below. Joe Stumpf is the creator of that. And I started this 30-day journey of working with the private work. And it's just a direct question and then a series of prompts and some journaling. And after 45 to 50 minutes, you actually land on an insight. So we are our own inner coach. And this particular quilt on the left, then, once I started to do the insight work, I recognized that I wanted a way to instantly recognize my insight in visual format. So there's 30 wedges here for those 30 days, one for each of the challenges. And as we know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So for example, then on the right is a slice of that pie, of the insight pie. And the question for that day was, what do I imagine is the resolution of a conflict that I am engaging in right now? And so my dilemma is that I work and earn my living as a real estate consultant, and yet I'm very time consuming, and I wanted to spend more time in the making of art. So my insight was that day, something that changed my life. And that was that I need to set office hours and focus my undivided attention on work when I'm at work, and also set art hours and focus my undivided attention on the making of art during those hours. So this, what time is it? The time is that I've gone quilting, kind of like I hang my shingle and at a quick glance, I can see that I've gone quilting. I also was involved in Soul Collage, which is a system of using imagination, images, and insight. It was designed by Sina Frost in the late 1900s, and there's the website below. And this is actually the very first card that I made. And it is really about speaking, again, much like private work, to your inner self, and allowing your inner self to respond in ways that you might not access from traditional means, or not using the realm of the imagination. So I tore out the image of the woman painting, and then applied her to a collage background. And then I asked her a system of questions. And one was, what message do you have for me? And she said, I am you. I am your soul speaking. You are born to create as you have always done across the ages. Then I asked her, what is my purpose in life? And she says, I am here as living proof that this is who you are. Like the waterfall crashing from above, I remind you that your creativity is endless, boundless, and constantly overflowing. And I said, how long have you been in my life? And she responds, I've always been here. You are returning to your true nature. And I asked her what her name is, and she said her name is the artist with all resources. All resources, that means that she has everything she needs. There's not the urge to go out and buy another tool, or to take another class, or to deliberate over this or that. She has what she needs. And in fact, this being the first Soul Collage card that I made, this is the artist archetype. And what's really amazing is that once you see what you see with this new kind of awareness or aha, you can never unsee it. So it's much like when you make something and you go to show it to somebody, you're very quick to point out the mistake. And from your point of view, you'll always see the mistake. Not that you need to talk about it to other people, but in your mind's eye, you always see the mistake. The same thing is here, in that once I recognize the artist in me has all the an artist in me, to an artist that has everything she needs. Pretty mind-blowing. So then I decided to put my insights into fabric. And this is, I was now back to the privatework.com. And this was something that the question for that day, or the direct question, was, what do I imagine is possible when I become even more self-reliant? And this little 5x7 fabric sketch is called The Road to No More Self-Doubt. So archetypes carry the magnitude, they carry the exponential purpose, they carry the bigger meaning. And if we look at them in art, we can see from Carol Pearson that the inner guides are archetypes that have been with us since the beginning and the dawn of time. We see them reflected in recurring images in art, literature, myth, and religion. And we know they are archetypal because they are found everywhere and in all times, in all places. So Monet's picture here on the left, this powerful symbol from Ben Heim, says, has meant many things to many cultures over the years: humanity, fertility, nature, creativity, duty, and redemption are just a few examples of what the image has come to mean. But most importantly of all, this symbol represents the embodiment of love. And so does the kiss, I think, from Gustav Klimt's work. Boy, that's tough to say. To me, this is the embodiment of the archetype lover. And again, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So look to see what patterns might be cropping up in your mind. Look to see what patterns you might be creating around you in your space. It could be color, it could be texture, it could be image or icon. And then the more I got into this, the more I realized that I really wanted to do art around the archetypes because there was so much access to power behind them. So a lot of my work around archetypes stems from Carolyn Myss. She was just extraordinary in really taking Jung's work to a whole nother level. And that was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. She wrote a book called Sacred Contracts, which is all about archetypes. And she refers to 4 survival archetypes that everybody has, the child being one. And we all were a child at one point. But keeping in mind that each archetype actually manages something, the child manages responsibility versus innocence, the belonging in a tribe, and yet claiming individuation. So there's all kinds of different children. There's the magical child, there's the divine child, there's the orphan child, there's the nature child, there's the petulant child, there's the wounded child, the invisible child. Did I say that one already? And it goes on and on. So if you take a look and think about how that child archetype influenced your being at such an early age and still has a fundamental effect on your being, how the artwork of a nature child might differ from the artwork of an invisible child. You could see that there's maybe a nature child will be very involved in making landscapes, and maybe the invisible child doesn't even show their artwork. So just as an example. So again, those survival archetypes that Carolyn Myss refers to as being the fundamental ones, like 4 pillars of a table, are part of our behavioral operating system. And by becoming aware of it, then we can become aware of the ability to reboot and reset that operating system. So another one of the survival archetypes is the victim. And the victim, as Carolyn Mace described, is the guardian of self-esteem. It manages self-esteem and manages the empowered self and setting boundaries. So for me, this was an replication of art that I made with that in mind. For me, the victim, the way I experienced it was being contained like a round peg trying to fit into a square hole. It just doesn't work. So this bird was caged, and I tried to represent both the shadow aspect and the light. And this is called liberated ecstasy. And then this is the thief archetype, and the thief really actually centers around the idea that the thief doesn't need to steal anything, because the thief, much like the woman with all resources or the artist with all resources, the thief already has it all. So there's no need to steal or borrow or copy, because she already has that innately. So this is the integrity of thief. It's kind of like a depiction, abstraction of broken glass with a I think it's a Chinese symbol for integrity. Another archetype that I made was the Hermit. And on the left side, I had taken my child on a play date and took a photo of this piece of this plant and blew it up, and you can see that it's depicted in fabric form. And of course, many of us had a visitation from the Hermit archetype during the early onset of COVID, with remaining indoors and separate from others, and may even still be doing so. But the beautiful thing about the archetype Hermit is, again, going inside, withdrawing inside to gain that wisdom, inner wisdom, and then the ability to bring it forth and share that with the world as the gift of life, light, I should say, light. Then I went into another soul collage card. And this one I immediately called the warrior of beauty and illumination. So I can see that that's kind of my mission, is to bring about beauty and to bring about illumination. So the beauty is in terms of the artwork, and the illumination is in terms of the archetype. And that's the pattern that I now see that I'm generating in my life, and I get so excited about, and that I'm presenting that in the world at large. Here's another one, the Alchemist archetype. And what I got from the warrior beauty and illumination is I was remembering the ancient tapestries hanging in the hallways of castles, huge and large and lasting hundreds, maybe even thousands of years, and the messages that were woven into them and the stories woven into them. So I was very excited about the possibility of actually having a worldwide exhibition of archetypes, and probably made in a textile fashion, because of course that's my medium. So I was practicing with the Alchemist and going larger. The Alchemist is about transformation. It's about turning lead into gold. And there's always a vessel in which the formula is incubating. There's always heat that's applied for that transformative process. And the alchemist seeks a formula, but in reality, there is no formula, because everything is accidental, experimental. So in looking at the survivor archetypes, this is one called the Saboteur, and the Saboteur is that infamous agent of change. And this is a 5x7 rendition. So I'm looking at kind of seeing things as cogwheel or operating status quo, because that's the nature of this Saboteur. She wants to keep things at status quo, but as things come in and intersect, and those those circumstances that change or a decision has to be made, the archetype of the Saboteur comes in play. So let's just spend a moment here talking about the patterns of Saboteur, and that is on the shadow, where and how we undermine ourselves because we fear change. Change is scary, but yet change is the only constant. Change will bring failure or it can bring success. It can go either way, but both are feared. And how do we keep playing small? But in the light, we make conscious and deliberate choices. They're the small minimum choices. Be the change that you wish to see in the world. Not the big showy changes, but those deliberate, consistent steps. So maybe one day putting on your sneakers when you get out of bed, and the next day putting on the sneakers and drinking a glass of water. And then the third day, putting on the sneakers, drinking the water and walking around the block and working your way up to the marathon. So the patterns for the archetype of the Saboteur is looking at intuition. How do we heed or ignore our intuition? The pattern of resistance. Maybe you put up those walls. This is the way that it's always been done. Or maybe you plant your feet in the ground and you stay stuck in the mud. Or another pattern of the archetype is using excuses. I don't have the right color to create my piece of art. I don't know how to draw, or this won't work, or I can't because, or I'm not an artist, or blah, blah, blah. Procrastination is a big one of the Saboteur, and I know that there's people listening to this who are recognizing themselves in that pattern. Why do today what I can put off inevitably, right? Or indecisive. So the Saboteur will keep you stuck in not being able to make your mind up. There's too many choices, not enough choices, or this choice is good, but so is this one, and you don't know which way to turn or what to do. Or doubting. Now, remember when I went back to that private work and I talked about that small rendition with the road, and that was the road to no more self-doubt? I was actually dealing with a Saboteur at that moment, not recognizing it at that time because I wasn't as familiar with Saboteur, but clearly that was. So the doubt undermines our path. It questions what we're doing and it keeps us, again, stuck in place. Or not completing things, fear of completion. What happens when you complete? How different will you be? Or how will the world be changed because you finished something? Or a relationship be altered because you carry through with what you said you were going to do? And then let's see. Oh, yes, I love this organization called ARTS, ARTS. It stands for Artists Recovering Through the 12 Steps. And their premise is that when you fall off the wagon, like an alcoholic picking up a drink, falling off the wagon refers to the fact that you didn't participate in making art on that day. So your sobriety is actually maintained by what they call 5 alive. So 1 day at a time and 5 minutes a day of making art is essential. 5 alive, 5 minutes of art every day is important. In the ARTS, ARTS support group. So the artist archetype is really what the artist archetype manages is creativity. And I like to go back to reflecting for yourself on what you've created. It could be a garden. It could be in the kitchen. It could be raising children. It could be the way you attend to your pets. It doesn't necessarily have to be a visual art. It could be performing art. Maybe you journal or write stories, or you write poetry, or in your dialogue, maybe Toastmasters. I mean, art is expressive in any one of multiple modalities. Maybe you dance in private, maybe you do yoga. There's all kinds of ways that you can participate in managing your creativity. So take a look at what those patterns are because that's going to give you access to who you are and what archetype is driving the bus. And once you know which archetype is driving the bus, then you take a look as to whether it's a shadow aspect or it's light aspect. And if you turn the notch up more to light, how does that alter your art? How does that alter your self-expression? Here's a beautiful quote. An archetypal patterns stepped forward out of the details and fragments of each life and assumed a definite shape, offering clear insight into that person's psyche and why her life was as it was. These patterns, often ancient in origin, populate our minds and lives in ways that affect us deeply. Yet we are generally unaware of them. These patterns of intelligence are archetypes, dynamic living forms of energy that are shared in many people's thoughts and emotions across cultures and countries. So creativity is a high risk activity because there's no guarantee of the outcome. You don't know how it's going to turn out. You don't know where it will take you. And you might have one thing in your head, but it doesn't really manifest that way in form. So there's all kinds of judgment around that as well. But it's about following your inspiration. And your inspiration is coming from your archetypes. So the clearer you can get about acting on that inspiration, the more you are manifesting the beauty, the power, the essence, and that incredible history that comes from thousands of years back from that particular archetype embodying in your world at this time. And Carolyn May says, if you have a passion, the passion has a purpose. So look to the passion, look to the purpose, look to the patterns that are creating that passion. Artists tend to follow patterns in their entire body of work as well. The techniques, the media, the approaches and subjects they choose can show a pattern across a lifetime. And it often defines their signature style. So if you think about artists that you admire, even again, performing artists, visual artists, the primo landscaper or the culinary artist, look for their signature style and begin to then turn that inside to yourself to determine your own signature style. Because in this sense, pattern becomes a part of the process of an artist's actions, a behavioral pattern, so to speak. So see the life patterns, seeing the life patterns actually through the archetype gives us a wider lens to view the patterns. I follow that loop. I'm going to repeat that again. Seeing your life patterns through the archetype, which gives us then a wider panoramic lens to view the patterns even more deeply. And remember, they're on a small microscopic scale as well as a cosmic scale. So I stuck this in here because, remember that card, the artist with all resources. Well, she was then transferred to the fabric rendition. This is pretty large. It's maybe 4 by 5 because I'm working up towards my tapestry. I've got this mission of the vision of the worldwide exhibition of archetypes of large scale, probably textile medium. And so in the making of this, I recognize that I have the missionary archetype, and that missionary archetype is the one that is called, it receives the word, the message, the drive, the programming, and the missionary then is about bringing to the world the beauty and illumination that is present and available to all of us. So I want to bring things to a close, but I want to read this beautiful quote from Carolyn Mays. As once you become congruent with the light, then you have to change. You are far more than your personality, more than your habits, more than your achievements. You are an infinitely complex human being with stories and myths and dreams and ambition of cosmic proportions. Don't waste time underestimating yourself. Dream big. Use the energy of your archetype to express the true reason you were born. Life was never meant to be saved. It was meant to be lived right to the end. So with that, I'd like to close and offer you to make comments, contact me with questions. If you're at all interested in the global exhibition of large-scale tapestry size archetypes, please do let me know, because that does require community, and I'm looking to curate it. I'm not looking to do all of those pieces in the art show itself. And explore your patterns, explore your purpose, explore your passion, and may the archetypes be at home with you and you at home with your archetypes. Thanks so much for listening.